A new news poll came out this week. That's the poll that the Australian newspaper commissions every so often into how the pollies are faring. Aussies still remain very much split between left and right. The two-party preferred vote, this is the poll that tries to copy what would happen in a real election when all the preferences of minor parties and independents get distributed out to the final two big parties. It still puts the combined left-wing vote, the red line, a touch ahead of the combined centre and right-wing vote, the blue line, 51 to 49% to Labor after preferences. So in statistical terms, that's kind of neck and neck. So Aussies remain split right down the political middle. When you have a look at the parties' individual breakdowns, let's look at it from left to right, politically speaking. The far-left Greens are down only a tiny bit to a huge 12% of the primary vote. The left-wing Labor Party are up a touch at 33%. The centre-right to centre-left Liberal National Party coalition is up a touch to 38%. That's also up a bit. And other parties across the political spectrum, like the right-leaning Libertarians and left-leaning Animal Welfare and Independents, hold about 10% of the primary vote. And the leading Conservative party, One Nation, is steady on 7%. In terms of preferred leader, Mr Albanese's net approval rating of -6 was a 1-point improvement, and Mr Dutton's net approval rating of -15 was unchanged. Albanese still leads as preferred PM by 13 points. The Australian newspaper says that its latest news poll also tested voter reaction to Labor's clean energy and industry agenda. This is the big state economic intervention policy they're calling A Future Made in Australia. This left-wing policy is basically firmly grounded in the idea that if the government says so, it can make people make stuff in Australia. Controlling economies, like that's always worked so well in the past. I can't imagine why it would fail now. Under this new policy, tax breaks, loans and subsidies for manufacturers will be provided, paid for by taxpayers. The Australian newspaper's pollsters asked voters, quote, whether the government should actively invest in projects that help Australia transition to a clean energy economy and create new local industries and jobs in Australia, unquote. And a second question, just to balance it out, asked, quote, whether the Australian government should stay out of the way and just provide a better environment for business by reducing energy costs, cutting red tape and reforming the industrial relations sector, unquote. The pollsters obviously have a lot of faith in people's appreciation of how the economy actually works. But anyway, for what it's worth, the majority of voters polled supported more government intervention in the economy, the left-wing philosophical view, while 38% believe that the government involvement should be contained to just creating an environment for business to thrive, the right-wing philosophical view. So no surprise there. The problem, though, is that it's not just a question of right or left. It's a question of right and wrong. The 20th century proved to the world that big state, big government interventions, and in fact big government itself, is actually a disaster for any economy, any society and any people. It makes a country poorer and it screws up all the social services for everyone as a result. Socialism destroys wealth, efficiency and value creation. And most of all, it destroys freedom of choice and incentive to do, well, anything really. So we end up with no healthcare, no disability services, no low-cost energy, no housing. It's all been tested already, folks, all worked out last century. But the kids today seem to be hell-bent on thinking that they're the first generation ever to consider that socialism can work. Let's hear in around 1 minute what socialism actually is, why it can't work, and this clip comes from the very clever people at Y Minutes, an online education channel. This is US politician and Army veteran Nick Freitas.
Socialism is a system or condition of society in which the means of production are owned and controlled by the state or the people. So what the hell does that mean? Well, under socialism, you can still own your toothbrush or a pair of shoes or some other sort of good, but you are not permitted to have private ownership of the very capital which is needed to produce those goods and services. No, those things must be owned by either the state or some kind of collective. And while we have ample examples of such a theory failing miserably when put into practice, there are still a lot of people that insist it's a really good theory. And maybe that's because there is some comfort in believing that if only the right people were in charge, and that all of us could agree on a particular course of action, then we could focus our collective efforts on making all of our lives better. The problem is, we don't agree. And ultimately, any theory which subordinates your individual ideas, creativity, or goals to a collective in the name of the common good is going to run into a couple of serious problems. And that first problem is, who gets to decide the common good? Because you as an individual certainly don't. The collective decides, which is to say some sort of simple majority. And if you and your ideas are outvoted or outmaneuvered politically when the time comes to draft the next 5-year plan, well, tough for you. The second problem with the system is that it degrades our humanity and treats people as if we're nothing more than producers or consumers. Under a socialist system, you're no longer an individual. You're simply a cog in the machine that needs to be managed toward a specific goal which will be determined by someone other than you. And this is why Alexis de Tocqueville warned that socialism calls in fact for the forfeiture of human liberty, to the point where I would say that it was simply a new system of serfdom.
The Australian-Newspoll also shows, unsurprisingly, that, quote, younger voters were more likely to support bigger government, with 64% of 18 to 34-year-olds agreeing with state intervention, compared with 31% citing the alternative. The only demographic where a larger number picked the better environment for business proposition was, you guessed it, those aged over 65, 49% compared with 48% in favour of intervention, unquote. So pack your bags and get the hell out would be the message I'd take from that. Not that that's anything new. Small business people have been giving up now for years. Most people I know over 50 who could be setting up a small business and putting their decades of work experience and knowledge to good use are packing their bags and heading for a nice retirement at the beach or buggering off overseas to some place that won't tax them to death. This is instead of doing what generations in the past in Australia did, setting up small businesses that might hire 10 to 20 kids at a pop. But don't worry, government just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you can choose your own pronouns when you work for the government, so that's cool. It's just that they will eventually run out of other people's money to spend to keep you employed. So, there's that. But hey, that's just the theory of a bunch of crusty old white men. What the heck would they know? They only created liberal democracy and capitalism over thousands of years, and they're to be scoffed at and disregarded completely. The Greens know best, kids. If you like that content, there's a lot more where that came from on The Other Side, a weekly show we put together, a summary of all the news of the week to get you smart for the weekend without the woke. Join us, smash that subscribe button and support us, and the little bell, and you can watch a full long episode here or subscribe here.